Chapter 45. The Scraping. Bucephalus barreled through the mountain community without encountering any obstacles. The roads were clear of cars, which were all parked neatly in driveways. Anyone who was still alive must have been following orders to stay inside, because he couldn't see another soul anywhere. The Sundance Resort was orderly, but no people were visible in the outdoor spaces, and all the buildings were dark from the outside. The ski lift, which should have been carrying hundreds of mountain bikers and hikers to the summit, sat motionless. Marcus took a moment to analyze the situation. Anthony had been killed at some point in the night by the Federation. Communication lines were down, and everyone was told to stay in place. Survivors were being isolated, making it easier to pick them off. The narrow road he traveled was free from the cars that normally clogged this canyon on beautiful summer days like today. Tall pines were his only companion, and the sole source of sound was the warhorse as it meandered down the mountain. The isolation made it hard to focus. His mind jumped from images of Anthony's body to Jordan's final farewell, to his time at the lab with Brad. This was the same stretch of pavement he traversed in one of his earliest sequences to save lives, he realized. Marcus reached the end of the North Fork spur and turned onto the larger highway heading out of Provo Canyon. Occasional cars and semis were parked on the shoulder, but all of them appeared to be empty of people. Without warning, the world shook violently beneath Bucephalus. The short tunnel Marcus was approaching looked as if it were ready to crumble. This was the only way down the canyon, Marcus thought, accelerating into the collapsing passage. Large chunks of concrete smashed onto the hood and roof, but he made it out unscathed as the mountainside reclaimed the man-made burrow behind him. Could that really have been a random coincidence? Confirmation came as the road shook a second time. Unlike the earthquake that toppled the tunnel, this was a shearing force that tore the road side to side, breaking it free from the surface before it was levitated into the air. Marcus blinked rapidly at what he was seeing. Entire sections of the highway on either side of him floated above the ground, then exploded into a trillion tiny pieces, like confetti bombs detonating inside transparent balloons. This controlled destruction consumed the guardrails, signposts, and parked vehicles near him, but left the road in front of Bucephalus untouched. Marcus accelerated again to outpace the annihilation, but the havoc spread like a wave to the surrounding landscape. A locomotive was lifted skyward from the rail beside the road, pulling up miles worth of train cars behind it before all were broken down into their molecular parts. The remnants resembled a massive swarm of bees. Road construction machinery, park structures, and buildings along the highway dematerialized in similar airborne bursts. Marcus was approaching the end of the canyon when he felt a wave of low-end vibrations. These weren't like the earthquakes he'd just witnessed. This had a steady rhythm and an increasing intensity, like a symphony slowly building toward a crescendo. The sound was coming from behind him. Bucephalus lacked any mirrors, so Marcus turned on the rear-view camera to observe his next horror. A towering wall of water from the dam at the other end of the canyon careened toward him. Marcus pushed Bucephalus to its maximum in an attempt to stay ahead of the deluge. The water tore apart the sides of the canyon like they were made of clay. The sound climbed in pitch and speed. Even in the armored vehicle, the volume was painfully piercing. The edge of the wave was pushing on the back of Bucephalus when Marcus burst from the canyon, veering onto a high road and out of the water's path. It flooded into a lower plain, swallowing hundreds of homes in the process. Though the vibrations from the raging water had subsided, Marcus's hands shook from adrenaline. He turned off the rear-view camera and focused on the road ahead. With the valley laid out before him, he could finally see the extent of the deconstruction taking place. And he sobbed. Tornadoes of debris formed in the densest areas of the obliteration, combining into the surrounding clouds of disassembled human structures and multiplying in size. One whirlwind razed the area where Anthony's house had been. Marcus grit his teeth as he watched this invisible hand scraping the mark of humanity from the face of the earth. Hecate peeked over the western mountains, starting its prograde rise into the heavens. It was a fitting reminder of the power he was impotent to stop, Marcus thought. He was certain that the Federation was behind this. Where a thriving suburban settlement had once been, only desolation remained. Bucephalus muffled the sounds of car alarms, cracking concrete and bending metal. Old, rusted vehicles rose from Utah Lake, only to disintegrate mid-air in the same managed demolition. Their scant material was sucked into the nearest tornado, which combined with the others into a hurricane swirl of refuse that cast the world into shadows. Marcus turned onto the interstate and headed for Salt Lake. The corporate buildings lining the road, including Antony's company headquarters, lifted from the dirt. Their levitation hypnotized Marcus because of their size, but like everything else, they exploded before being fed into the supply chain of scrap across the sky. Electrified power lines flailed erratically around him. The foul smell of natural gas wafted through the air conditioning moments before explosions shot from either side of the freeway, mapping out the entire path of underground utility grids like fences made of fire. The pandemonium paused as Marcus approached the point of the mountain, a geological dividing line between Utah Valley, where Antony lived and worked, and the Salt Lake Valley. From his vantage point, he saw the same system of deconstruction happening across the larger, more populated expanse. How could anyone shelter in place while everything around them was destroyed? Marcus asked with a heavy heart. His introspection ended when another earthquake ripped up the highway around him like an unwanted carpet. Twin tornadoes converged on Marcus, completely blacking out the world. He squeezed the steering wheel until his fingers reached their breaking point, trying to keep Bucephalus from succumbing to the swirling forces. After a perilous moment of driving blind, he broke into the eye of the storm, staring through the armored windshield at the blue sky above him. The momentary peace was replaced by more chaos as he passed through the far side of the twisters. Marcus screamed, relying on his voice to propel him safely through the encircling storm. The act of affirmation had worked. Marcus broke loose of the whirlwinds and continued on the highway when a reverberating metallic sound echoed across the valley. It reminded him of something from one of Jordan's songs, like the sound a stretched-out slinky makes when struck by something hard. On the northern horizon, a giant blue band of plasma slithered across the sky. This thick substance was above and beyond the hurricane of human material, rising like a ring that encircled the planet. It moved at an incredible speed, reaching its zenith over Marcus in seconds, and continuing beyond his view to the southern horizon. The blue band left a strong smell of ozone, and a stronger feeling of static electricity in the air. Most of the digital gadgets within Bucephalus suddenly failed, making the warhorse harder to steer than an actual wild stallion. An alarm screeched through the cabin, accompanied by flashing red floodlights. A single button labeled Reset pulsated on the dash. Marcus slapped it, silencing the alarm and warning lights, and restoring power to the rest of the vehicle. He wasn't sure how much additional stress his system or Bucephalus could stand. The asphalt continued to disappear behind him as he turned off the interstate and onto the belt route to campus. The community was already gone, amplifying the apocalyptic appearance of the area. As the road climbed onto the benches near the base of the Wasatch Mountains, Marcus could see the towers of downtown, including the Wells Fargo Center, blown away, one story at a time like dust in the wind. Beyond the buildings to the west sat empty land. The black market and its go zones had been completely razed to the ground. Mount Olympus loomed over Marcus to the east. He gazed into the cove but couldn't tell which mansion was Monica's. It didn't matter, since all were being torn to pieces by a trio of tornadoes. His heart dropped into his stomach, but a blinding glitter of light in his peripheral vision grabbed his attention. A jetliner was falling from the sky, targeted on his position like an inbound missile. Marcus braced at the last second for an inevitable collision, but like a phantom the plane dissolved around Bucephalus, leaving Marcus unscathed as he continued cruising the highway. He suppressed the instinct to vomit. None of the windows could open in the vehicle, and the last thing Marcus wanted was to add the noxious smell of his stomach's contents to the stresses he was subjected to. After a series of deep breaths, he'd calmed down, merging off the freeway and onto an overpass leading to campus, which evaporated the moment his wheels had cleared the concrete. The whole area had been wiped clean of human construction, including roads, causing Bucephalus to bounce violently as it crawled across the uneven virgin soil. His trip from Sundance had taken hours, but he could finally see campus a couple of miles away. He moved slowly, occasionally using Bucephalus's crab-walking feature to maneuver around massive holes where subterranean structures had been uprooted. It was peaceful from his position on the hill, but he could see the carnage continuing across the rest of the valley. It was a strange sensation, Marcus thought, watching in safety from afar at the suffering happening everywhere else. He'd made it most of the way to campus when another obstacle from the air made itself known. The first impact hit a mile away, but the shockwave from the impact created long cracks in his windshield. It looked like a meteorite, given its speed and trajectory, and was quickly followed by others raining down. A dozen explosions erupted, each scarring deep into the earth a safe distance from Marcus, and each sending a shockwave that pushed Bucephalus off its path. When he came upon the closest crater, he could see the remains of a satellite. One prominent piece bore the distinct, stylized X of the Starlink logo. This, like the other identical objects, had been part of the satellite train delivering free internet to humanity. Marcus laughed like a lunatic at this cosmic coincidence. The fallen satellites Antony had once helped optimize met their end, like his brother, right before Marcus's eyes. Then, the satellite fragments dissipated into a tiny cloud. He continued his voyage in silence, waiting for another surprise, but none came. Instead, it was the absence of what he'd hoped to find that shocked him next. The neighborhoods surrounding campus were gone. All the trees, houses, roads, and businesses had vanished, presumably taking Jordan in the process. Battery acid pumped in his veins where blood had previously been. The stress of what he'd experienced in the last few hours hit, all at once. Wiping the tears from his eyes, Marcus could see the rest of campus was intact, including the housing unit near the university hospital where Diana lived. For the first time that day, Marcus had hoped that some of his family had survived. Like when he'd started his journey, there wasn't a soul in sight. He was looking at the school's iconic U on the mountainside when a final monstrous quake dissolved every remaining structure, like sand into its own footprint. With it went his hope for Diana and their children. Only one building remained in the big field: Carlson Hall. Marcus considered ramming Bucephalus into Brad's office as a first strike, but worried he'd get trapped in the vehicle if the building collapsed on top of him. He circled Carlson Hall endlessly, waiting for something to burst from the lab, but nothing came. He knew what he needed to do, but he was afraid to leave the safety of his warhorse. He wanted to understand what happened to Antony, Monica, Jordan, and Diana and their children. Brad had answers, but he didn't want to hear that his friend had been a part of this attack. After a prolonged argument, Marcus accepted his fate, parking parallel to the lab outside of the brown door leading to Brad's office. Marcus climbed cautiously from his vehicle as Hecate began a transit of the sun. He'd witnessed these eclipses more times than he cared to count, but today it had a completely different meaning. The enemy held the high ground. The world dimmed, replaced by the familiar celestial wheel, with its symmetrical spokes of light projecting in rays from behind the alien planet. The sight sent chills crawling up his spine. Marcus took a breath, gripping the doorknob to Brad's lab in one hand, and holding Invictus at the ready in his other.